When it comes to writing an awesome opening scene, there are 6 traits that you need. And the first one you must have is to start the story. The character waking up or doing normal life or blah blah blah, no Skippy, get this party started. The reader needs to know what kind of story they're in for, and you need to let them in on it. It is not a secret. And you've got to understand 2 critical things. First, you are writing a script that's meant to be read. If people don't want to read it and they don't get all the way to the end, you're done. And one thing that makes them stop reading is that they don't know what the story is about. So you have to tell them or imply it to them because of what you write beginning on page 1. Now, that first reader you get to, yeah, they have to read the whole thing. They have to write notes on it. But if it's a good read and they recommend you, everyone else who reads it will stop reading even on page 1 if you aren't starting the story or doing some of the other things that I'm going to mention. And that includes number 2 on my list, which is make a reader want to turn to page 2. And both starting the story and making them want to turn the page are intricately tied together because you have to blend the 2 pieces of story writing in a masterful way. And those 2 pieces would be the story itself, so the events that happen to someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't, and the storytelling piece, which is how you tell the story. And if your story isn't getting started off right off the bat, you've got problems because the first few questions readers are wondering about are, what is the story about? What is the tone? And what should I expect? And what you do on the first few pages 100% impacts the impressions of the reader. And on top of that, you have to write the story in a way where there is some reason, some inkling that makes the reader want to turn to page 2. And while I'm not a fan of formulas or formulaic writing and having certain things happen on specific page numbers, which is actually a bunch of hogwash, there are a couple of things you got to pay attention to. How are you ending the actual page on pages 1 through 10? Now, don't mishear me and think you've got to format your script all wonky to have cliffhanger moments that are massive and Billy's sliding, falling, grasping for anything. The cliff is approaching. Billy's frantically grabbing for anything when all of a sudden, end of page. Okay, that's cheap. Does it work? Well, sometimes, yeah, but you're a writer, and writers are smart, so I know you can do better. And the things that make you turn the page are interesting moments and interesting characters, so you better have some of them right at the beginning and tell the story in such a way that the format of it helps to create moments that force a reader to turn the page. Again, if it's cheesy, they're going to see through it. So the other things I'm going to mention will help with the cheese factor, but you must not forget that you have to give the reader a reason to turn to page 2, and you have to start your story on page 1. And I read a lot of scripts where the first 5 to 10 pages can just be lopped off. Nothing is happening, and readers hate when nothing is happening. There needs to be stakes. It needs to feel important. It needs to be interesting and happening to interesting characters. And I didn't say likable characters. I said interesting. So get the party started and give reasons to turn the pages. So there's 2, and the next one is going to feel a bit intangible, and admittedly, it's more of a feeling and you can't totally control it. You can help, but you can't control it. And it's that your first scene should make your story feel fresh and new. Not something we've seen before. That doesn't mean it has to be in a location that isn't in a lot of movies. It might, but it doesn't have to. But if it is in a new location, that can help with the feeling of it being fresh and new. And if it's in a location we've seen before, it should be something that doesn't feel like we've seen it a gazillion times. Or we're looking at things from the point of view of a character we don't normally connect with. Or it's a normal location with a very abnormal thing happening. And the reason you do this is to create interest and mystery in what is happening. The reader should be curious about what they're seeing and want to understand why they're seeing it. So a common opening, a bedroom, a character waking up in their bed in the morning. Okay, that's major boring, Skippy. It's been done so often, it's kind of a trope. It's something you should avoid. But same bedroom, same time, but the bed is already made. And yet Vicky, 10, crawls out from underneath the bed holding a machete. Okay, that's way more interesting. And now you want to read on to understand why is 10-year-old Vicky sleeping with a machete underneath her bed. The 4th thing your opening scene has to do is you have to ground the reader in a new world. And it doesn't matter what the setting is for your script. And in case you don't remember or haven't learned, the setting is both the where and the when your story takes place. So it doesn't matter what your setting is, you must ground the reader in the world of your story. Even if it's a modern day world, you have to give them something to hang on to, an anchor point, if you will, where they can begin. And it doesn't matter if it's a modern day world, fantastical, magical, alien, whatever, let the first image you place in the reader's mind be something that they can connect to. It has to be something that makes sense. One of the best ways to accomplish this is to start either micro or macro. And I go into this a lot more in my Fast Track course, as well as a bunch of other tools for crafting a story, telling it in a compelling way, and a link is below for that if you're interested. But the gist is that you start on something that is easily identifiable. A doorknob, a coat rack, a steering wheel, a microphone, something that a reader can quickly know what it is and generally where those things might be. But then you finish the description by revealing the location, and it can be anywhere, and you do it in a way that gets us to a normal point of view. So you can think about this as starting on a close-up and pulling out, or start mega wide and push in, ultimately getting to what you're wanting to settle on. So a rusty nail in weathered wood, a calloused hand hangs a sweat-stained cowboy hat on it. The only thing old in the spaceport saloon, and it was just placed there by Connor Bricks, the meanest sheriff this side of Jupiter. And we can be in space, but it's something that is familiar to help the reader not feel lost right at the beginning, even though we're in a whole new world and a whole new place. This is what grounding the audience means. So if you want some practice, try it in the comments below. Write a first description paragraph of no more than 3 sentences, and the first image we see is a chair or seat of your choice. Pretend it's the first image of a script you're writing. You don't have to introduce a character like I did, but you do have to practice moving from something small to a larger thing, from a close-up to a wider shot. And as a side note, notice how I wrote that is how it would be shot. The only way to see the rusty nail is a close-up, and the camera pulls back to reveal the saloon, without me writing in camera directions, which is another tool I explain in the Fast Track course, one of many. And this grounding the reader can go the other way too. You can go from large to small, like a thriving futuristic metropolis. Flying cars crisscross with one another. Some are bright pink taxis. And taxi A4731 has seen better days. Its bumper barely hanging on. Here we start wide, macro, and go to a closer shot, to micro. So whatever you do, ground your reader. And then, while you're doing it, don't overwhelm your reader with characters, descriptions, etc. On this one, word choice and content matters. So you don't want to overwhelm them by suddenly naming a bunch of important characters at once. Give the reader time to absorb characters and locations. And don't write descriptions that would be better suited for a novel. In a novel, you can mention the color of the drapes. In a screenplay, you probably aren't even going to mention the drapes, unless they're going to be important to the story at some point. Like someone has to escape out of the second-story window by hanging on the drapes. In fact, that's a great opening shot. A stone mansion, multi-level, everything manicured to precision until a chair is chucked through the second-story window and a gangly teenager uses the curtains as a makeshift rope to escape. It's enough information to not overwhelm, but the story is starting. It seems like a common location at first, but it isn't because abnormal stuff is happening. It's macro to micro to ground the reader. There's some inherent mystery because a teenager's escaping for some reason, and we want to know what it is, and we're not overwhelmed. So early on in your script, and definitely on page 1, readers are grasping for information about what is going on, but more importantly, they need a sense of what am I gonna have to remember. And if you give a bunch of detailed information, it's too much. If you give a bunch of names of characters, no one will remember them. Introduce things at a pace the reader can handle. Don't overwhelm them. And the last thing your opening scene definitely has to have is conflict. So many scripts have 0 conflict in the first scene. It's usually all about status quo, a normal life, blah, 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 blah. And you need to establish the status quo. That's totally true. But that doesn't mean that nothing is happening. You've got to have some conflict. And if you have 0 conflict on page 1, it doesn't matter how much you have in the rest of your script. They've already stopped reading. And there are lots of ways to incorporate conflict, and watching this will help you out. Thank you for watching. Fun buttons and links below. And when you tell a story, the first scene has to be fantastic and tell a story that matters. See you later.